When the Caltharian Empire first encountered human military forces, their war council erupted in laughter. These primitive beings from the third rock of an unremarkable star system had the audacity to paint their warriors in green and brown patches, as if such crude deception could fool sensors capable of detecting a heartbeat from orbit. The Caltharians, with their advanced cloaking technology and energy shields, saw human camouflage as nothing more than children playing dress-up. They were about to learn the deadliest lesson in galactic history. Never underestimate a species that spent millennia perfecting the art of making its deadliest predators invisible. In the dense jungles of Kepler 442b, where even the most sophisticated alien technology struggles against nature's chaos, one human sniper named Marcus Chun would turn their mockery into their nightmare. Armed with nothing but a rifle, his grandfather's ghillie suit, and generations of human cunning, he would prove that sometimes the oldest tricks are the most terrifying. The hunt was about to begin, and the hunters would become the hunted. The Caltharian dropships descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere like metal locusts, their hulls gleaming silver against the emerald canopy below. Admiral Zektar watched the jungle world grow larger on his command screen, satisfaction radiating from his four arms as they gripped the tactical display. This would be another easy conquest for the Empire, another primitive world to add to their collection. "Admiral, the human settlement is directly ahead," reported his communications officer, Villanas. "Population approximately 50,000. No significant military installations detected." Zektar's mandibles clicked in amusement. The humans had been so eager to establish their little colony on this remote world, thinking distance from Earth would protect them. How wrong they were. The Caltharian Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for 3 centuries, and no species had ever successfully resisted them for more than a few rotations. "Any sign of their so-called military forces?" Zektar asked, his voice carrying the confidence of a predator who had never met his match. "Thermal scans show approximately 200 humans scattered throughout the jungle perimeter. They appear to be wearing some form of decorative covering. Green and brown patterns." Villanas paused, consulting his instruments. "Sir, they seem to be trying to blend in with the vegetation." The bridge erupted in clicking laughter. Zektar's secondary arms joined the first in slapping the command console in mirth. "Decorative covering? You mean they're painted like plants?" He turned to address his crew. "Did you hear that? These primitives think coloring themselves green will somehow hide them from our sensors." The laughter intensified. Even a usually stoic weapons officer, Kraldok, allowed himself a few clicks of amusement. The Caltharians had conquered species with energy manipulation, others with advanced robotics, some with psychic abilities. But none had ever been foolish enough to think simple pigmentation could fool military-grade detection equipment. "Sir," Villanas continued, wiping moisture from his optical sensors, "should we even bother with the scanning protocols? It seems like overkill for such a primitive resistance." Zektar considered this. Standard Imperial procedure demanded thorough reconnaissance before any ground assault. But these humans had just demonstrated a level of technological naivety that bordered on comedic. Why waste time on protocols designed for actual threats? Skip the deep scans, he decided. Deploy standard assault formation. Let's finish this quickly so we can move on to more worthy conquests. The first mistake had been made. Marcus Chun lay perfectly still in his hide, watching the alien ships through his scope. The ghillie suit that covered him was a work of art, crafted from local vegetation and refined through 3 weeks of careful observation. Every thread had been chosen, every fiber positioned to break up his human outline and blend seamlessly with the jungle floor. His grandfather would have been proud. The old man had served in Vietnam, learning the deadly art of invisibility in another jungle on a distant world. He'd passed down more than just techniques to Marcus. He'd passed down a philosophy. The best camouflage wasn't about hiding from technology, it was about becoming part of the environment itself. Marcus breathed slowly, letting his heart rate settle as he watched the aliens maneuver their forces. His radio crackled with whispered reports from the other snipers positioned throughout the jungle perimeter. Sarah Kim was a click to his north, former Marine Scout sniper with more confirmed kills than anyone in the colony. Tommy Rodriguez held the southern approach, a hunter who could track a deer through snow and take it down at 800 meters. Lisa Park covered the Eastern Ridge, an Olympic biathlete who turned her shooting skills to more deadly purposes when the call for colonists went out. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. This was a civilian colony, after all. But when you're 300 light years from Earth and aliens show up with obvious hostile intent, you work with what you have. And what they had were people who understood that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Contact, 12 ships incoming. Marcus whispered into his throat mic, "Formations suggest they're not taking us seriously." "Copy that. Ghost Lead," came Sarah's voice. Ghost Lead, that's what they called him now. Marcus had earned the nickname during training exercises when he'd managed to get within knife range of the colony's security chief without being detected. The man had been wearing full tactical gear with motion sensors. Marcus had been wearing his grandfather's ghillie suit and patience. The Caltharian ships settled into landing formations around the colony's perimeter. Marcus counted roughly 400 aliens disembarking, their energy weapons gleaming in the filtered sunlight. They moved with the casual confidence of species that had never encountered serious resistance. Through his scope, Marcus studied their leader. Tall, four-armed, with an exoskeleton that suggested natural armor. The alien was gesturing dismissively toward the jungle, probably commenting on how easy this would be. Marcus adjusted his rifle scope, taking note of wind direction and distance. 830 meters. Well within his comfort zone. But not yet. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon, more valuable than the finest rifle or the clear scope. His grandfather had taught him that too. Wait for the moment when your shot means something, when it changes everything. That moment was coming. The Caltharian ground force spread out in textbook assault formation, energy shields humming to life around each soldier. Admiral Zektar descended from his command ship in a personal transport, confident enough in his force's superiority to observe the conquest personally. This would make an excellent recording for the Imperial Archives, another example of Caltharian military efficiency. "Thermal imaging confirms human positions," reported the ground commander, Captain Mordek. "They're maintaining their hiding positions. Shall we simply bombard the jungle and be done with it?" "No," Zektar replied, his voice carrying across the formation through their communication implants. "I want them to see our approach. Let them understand how futile their resistance is before we destroy them. Perhaps some will surrender and provide useful intelligence about Earth's military capabilities." The Caltharians began their advance into the jungle, sensors sweeping ahead of them in overlapping fields of detection. Heat sensors, motion detectors, electromagnetic scanners, even chemical analyzers capable of identifying human pheromones at 50 meters. It was technological superiority at its finest, the accumulated advantages of a species that had conquered 1,000 worlds. Marcus watched them come, counting steps and calculating angles. The aliens moved well for a technologically advanced species, but they moved like beings who had never needed to truly hide from anything. Their formations were perfect for open warfare, less ideal for jungle fighting where sight lines were measured in meters and every shadow could conceal death. He keyed his radio. "All stations, they're coming in hard and confident. Remember your training. Wait for my signal." "Copy, Ghost Lead." "Roger that." Waiting for green light. The first Caltharian patrol passed within 20 meters of Sarah's position. She remained motionless as a statue, her breathing controlled, her heartbeat steady. The alien sensors swept over her location multiple times, detecting nothing more than the ambient heat signature of decomposing vegetation and the chemical traces of native plant life. A second patrol moved past Tommy's hide. Their electromagnetic sensors registered the metal in his rifle, but the signal was distorted by the iron-rich soil and dismissed as natural mineral deposits. The aliens' technology was impressive, but it was designed to detect threats in the sterile environments of starships and artificial habitats. The jungle was chaos, full of competing signals and false readings that confused even the most sophisticated instruments. Lisa watched a third patrol approach her position from the east. One of the aliens stopped directly above her, its four arms working frantically over a handheld device. It made clicking sounds that might have been their equivalent of cursing. The device was registering something, but the readings were inconsistent. Tree roots, mineral deposits, underground water, decomposing organic matter. The jungle was a symphony of signals that made precision detection nearly impossible. The alien moved on, dismissing the readings as environmental interference. Marcus felt a cold smile cross his face as he watched the Caltharian advance bogged down in confusion. Their sensors were finding targets everywhere and nowhere. Heat signatures that turn out to be rotting logs. Movement that was just wind-blown vegetation. Chemical traces that led to pools of stagnant water. The jungle was teaching them its first lesson. Technology was only as good as the environment in which it operated. Admiral Zektar's confidence began to waver as reports flooded in from his ground teams. Sir, thermal imaging is compromised by ambient heat from decomposing vegetation. Motion sensors are detecting wind-blown foliage. Chemical analysis is being overwhelmed by the natural biological diversity. Then, use visual confirmation, Zektar snapped. These humans can't be invisible. But that's exactly what they appear to be. The Caltharian soldiers spread through the jungle like a search net, looking for enemies their instruments insisted were nearby, but their eyes couldn't find. They began firing at shadows, at suspicious-looking logs, at anything that might possibly conceal a human. The jungle swallowed their energy bolts without complaint, trees exploding into splinters, vines catching fire, animals fleeing in terror. But no human screams, no return fire, just the oppressive silence of a forest that seemed to be watching them. Where are they? Captain Mordek's voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there an hour before. Marcus had been waiting for that uncertainty. Fear was a weapon, just like his rifle. Let it build. Let it spread through their ranks like a disease. Confident enemies were predictable. Frightened enemies made mistakes. He found his target through the scope. A Caltharian soldier who had separated from his unit, trying to investigate what his sensors insisted was a human heat signature behind a fallen log. The alien was exposed, his attention focused on his instruments rather than his surroundings. Marcus's crosshairs centered on the creature's head, just below where he estimated the brain would be located. His finger found the trigger, muscle memory from 1,000 hours of practice taking over. The wind was calm. The range was 600 meters. The target was stationary. Marcus squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed through the jungle like thunder. The Caltharian soldier's head exploded in a shower of purple fluid, his body crumpling to the forest floor before his squad mates could even process what had happened. For a moment, perfect silence. Then, chaos erupted as energy weapons began firing in every direction, the aliens spinning and seeking a target they couldn't see. Marcus was already moving, using a rope line he'd prepared earlier to swing to a secondary position 50 meters away. The ghillie suit reformed around him like a living thing, vegetation closing over his form until he became just another shadow in the green hell that surrounded them. Ghost, lead to all stations, he whispered into his radio as he settled into his new hide. First blood is ours. The hunt begins now. The Caltharia Empire had just learned why humans had spent 50,000 years perfecting the art of making their warriors disappear. But the lesson was far from over. The purple blood of the dead Caltharian soldier seeped into the jungle floor as his squad mates frantically searched for the invisible killer. Their energy weapons swept back and forth, painting bright lines through the humid air, but finding only empty space where their enemy should have been. Report. Admiral Zektar's voice crackled through their communications. What happened to Soldier Kexmore? Unknown contact, sir. Captain Mordek replied, his voice tight with stress. Single projectile weapon, high velocity. The shot came from approximately 600 meters, but our scans show no heat signature, no movement, nothing. Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed this information. A projectile weapon? The humans were using kinetic firearms against energy shields and advanced armor? It should have been laughably ineffective. Yet one of his soldiers was dead, killed by what amounted to a metal slug fired from a primitive chemical propulsion system. Increase scanning intensity, he ordered. Deploy seismic sensors. If they're using projectile weapons, they have to be physically present. Find them. But Marcus was already 3 positions away from where he'd taken a shot, ghosting through the jungle with the fluid grace of someone who had made the forest his ally rather than his enemy. The ghillie suit that covered him wasn't just camouflage. It was a work of adaptive artistry. Native vines wove through the burlap base, local moss clung to strategic points, and insects had actually begun to use it as habitat. He wasn't just hidden in the jungle anymore, he was part of it. 2 clicks to the north, Sarah Kim was having similar success. She'd been tracking a Caltharian patrol for 20 minutes, moving parallel to their path while remaining completely undetected. The aliens were good soldiers, she had to admit. Their formations were tight, their weapon discipline excellent. But they were soldiers trained for warfare in the sterile environments of starships and artificial habitats. Here, surrounded by millions of years of evolutionary chaos, their advantages meant nothing. Sarah found her shot as the patrol paused to investigate another false sensor reading. The squad leader had positioned himself perfectly, standing in a small clearing while his soldiers spread out to search the surrounding area. 700 meters, slight crosswind, target moving slowly. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle, and found her natural point of aim. The rifle became an extension of her body, the scope an extension of her eyes. At this distance, on this world, with this target, there was only one possible outcome. The bullet took the Caltharian squad leader in the center of mass, punching through his energy shield like it wasn't there. The shield technology was designed to deflect energy weapons and repel charge particles. A simple chunk of lead core copper at 2,800 feet per second was apparently outside its design parameters. Sarah was moving before the alien hit the ground, using prepared routes to fade back into the jungle's embrace. Behind her, the remaining squad members opened fire on everything and nothing, their disciplined formations dissolving into panicked clusters of frightened soldiers. Tommy Rodriguez was learning similar lessons about alien psychology from his position on the southern perimeter. The Caltharian soldiers were brave when they could see their enemy, disciplined when they understood their tactical situation. But humans have been dealing with invisible predators for their entire evolutionary history. They learned to fight tigers in tall grass, track wolves through snow, and survive things that hunted them in the dark. The Caltharians had never needed those skills. Their technology had made them apex predators in every environment they'd encountered. Until now, Tommy's target was a communications specialist, easily identified by the additional equipment mounted on his back. Taking out their communications would force them to rely on short-range systems, making coordination between units more difficult. He'd learned that principle from his grandfather, who'd fought in Korea against an enemy that excelled at communication and coordination. The shot was clean, 550 meters through a gap in the canopy. The communications specialist dropped without a sound, his equipment sparking and smoking as it hit the ground. Tommy was already moving to his next position, leaving behind only a perfectly ordinary piece of jungle that showed no sign anyone had ever been there. Lisa Park had found something even better than a single target. An entire Caltharian squad had taken shelter in what they thought was a secure position, using their energy shields to create a defensive perimeter while they tried to re-establish contact with their command unit. They'd chosen well, tactically, a piece of high ground with excellent fields of fire. They'd also positioned themselves directly in front of Lisa's primary shooting lane, 800 meters away, with perfect visibility. She took her time, studying each target through her scope. The squad leader was obvious, marked by different equipment and the way the others deferred to him. But there was another alien that interested her more, one whose equipment suggested he might be a technical specialist. In her Olympic days, Lisa had learned to read wind, temperature, humidity, and a dozen other variables that affected bullet trajectory. Now she was learning to read alien body language, equipment configurations, and tactical positioning. The technical specialist would be her first target. Disrupting their ability to adapt to human tactics was more important than simple body count. The bullet found its mark with a precision that had once won her Olympic gold. The technical specialist crumpled, his sophisticated instruments scattered across the jungle floor. Before the others could react, Lisa was already working her bolt, finding her second target. The squad leader managed one burst from his energy weapon before Lisa's second shot took him down. The remaining soldiers began firing wildly, their disciplined formation collapsing into chaos as they searched for an enemy they couldn't find. Lisa smiled coldly as she faded back into the jungle. Her grandfather had been a sniper in World War II, island hopping across the Pacific against an enemy that thought they owned the jungle. He'd taught her that patience and precision would always triumph over superior numbers and advanced technology. Admiral Zektar watched the tactical display with growing alarm as red icons began appearing across the battle zone. 4 soldiers dead, 2 more wounded, and his ground force was reporting contact with an enemy they couldn't locate, couldn't track, and couldn't engage effectively. "Sir," Captain Mordeck's voice was strained. "We're taking casualties from an invisible enemy. Our sensors detect nothing, but they're picking us off one by one." "Impossible," Zektar replied, but his confidence was beginning to crack. "Deploy countermeasures. Use area denial weapons. If we can't see them, we'll destroy everything." "Sir, the jungle canopy is too dense for orbital bombardment. Area denial weapons would require us to level several square kilometers of forest. The environmental damage would be—" "I don't care about environmental damage." Zektar's voice rose to a shriek. "I care about completing this mission without losing half my ground force to primitive savages with projectile weapons." But even as he gave the order, Zektar knew something fundamental had changed. His soldiers, the elite troops of the Caltharian Empire, were being systematically hunted by an enemy that existed only as muzzle flashes and corpses left in their wake. Down in the jungle, Marcus was preparing for the next phase of the operation. The aliens were scared now. He could see it in how they moved, how they clustered together for mutual protection instead of maintaining proper tactical spacing. Fear was good. Fear made them predictable. He keyed his radio. "All stations, Ghost Lead. Prepare for Phase 2. We're going to show them why humans learn to hunt in packs." The response came immediately from all 3 positions. "Roger, Ghost Lead. Standing by." Marcus smiled as he settled into his next firing position. The aliens had made the classic mistake of assuming that superior technology guaranteed victory. They'd never learned the lesson that every successful human hunter knew by heart. The most dangerous predator was the one you never saw coming. And they were about to learn it the hard way. The Caltharian soldiers had begun moving in tight formations, their energy shields overlapping to create protective barriers as they advanced through the jungle. It was solid tactical thinking for conventional warfare, but it also made them easier targets for coordinated fires. Marcus found his mark first. A soldier on the edge of the formation, momentarily separated from his squad as they navigated around a massive tree trunk. The shot was clean, 600 meters through a natural corridor in the canopy. The alien dropped without a sound, his energy weapon clattering across the forest floor. 3 seconds later, Sarah's rifle spoke from the north. Another soldier down, this one a communications specialist who'd been trying to re-establish contact with the command ship. The Caltharians spun toward the sound, weapons raised, but found only empty jungle. Tommy's shot came 5 seconds after that, taking down what looked like a squad leader. The remaining aliens began firing wildly, their disciplined formations dissolving as panic took hold. They were shooting at shadows, at movements that might be wind-blown vegetation, at anything that could possibly conceal a human. Lisa's final shot silenced their return fire permanently. The last soldier in the formation crumpled to the ground, his weapon spinning away into the undergrowth. In less than 15 seconds, an entire Caltharian squad had been eliminated by an enemy they never saw, never located, and never had a chance to engage. The jungle fell silent except for the drip of alien blood and the distant calls of native birds. Marcus keyed his radio. "All stations confirmed targets eliminated. North position, 2 confirmed kills. South position, 1 confirmed kill. East position, 2 confirmed kills. Copy all. Displacement to secondary positions. The real fun is just beginning." Admiral Zektar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 7 more soldiers lost, an entire patrol eliminated without inflicting a single casualty on the enemy. His ground force was being systematically destroyed by an opponent that his sensors insisted didn't exist. "Sir," Villeneuve said quietly, "perhaps we should consider orbital bombardment. Level the entire forest and be done with it." Zektar's mandibles clicked slowly as he considered this option. The Caltharian Empire had built its reputation on swift, overwhelming victories. To resort to planetary bombardment against a few primitive colonists would be embarrassing. The other Imperial commanders would mock him for centuries. But watching his soldiers die one by one was worse than embarrassment. "Prepare bombardment coordinates," he finally said. "If these humans want to hide in their jungle, we'll remove the jungle." It was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for. Let them get frustrated. Let them abandon tactics for brute force. An enemy using orbital bombardment couldn't distinguish between combatants and civilians, which meant the galaxy would see the Caltharian Empire for what it really was. And more importantly, orbital bombardment took time to coordinate, target, and execute. Time that would allow the snipers to do even more damage to Caltharian morale. He settled into his next position and began selecting targets for the evening's work. The aliens had no idea how long a night could be when death was watching them from every shadow. Night fell across Kepler. 442b like a thick curtain, plunging the jungle into absolute darkness broken only by the pale glow of two moons filtering through the canopy. For the Caltharian soldiers, accustomed to the controlled environments of starships and orbital stations, the darkness was an alien enemy as dangerous as any human sniper. But for Marcus Chun and his team, the night was coming home. Marcus adjusted his night vision scope, a piece of equipment that had been standard issue for human militaries for over a century. The technology was primitive compared to Caltharian sensors, but it had one crucial advantage. It was designed by predators for predators, built to help humans do what they did best in the dark: hunt. The Caltharian ground force had established a defensive perimeter around their landing zone. Energy shields creating overlapping fields of protection, while powerful floodlights pushed back the darkness. It was textbook defensive doctrine, the kind of position that could hold off a conventional assault indefinitely. Against an enemy that attacked from shadows and vanished like smoke, it was a trap waiting to be sprung. "All stations, Ghost lead," Marcus whispered into his radio. "Night operations are in effect. Remember your training. We own the dark." The responses came back immediately, four voices that had learned to trust in each other and in the ancient human art of making war in the night. "Copy, Ghost lead. North position ready. South position locked and loaded. East position, targets acquired. West position, standing by." Sarah Kim had taken the time during the day to study the Caltharian defensive positions, memorizing sight lines and calculating angles. Now, as she settled into her hide, overlooking the alien perimeter, she could see the flaws in their setup. The floodlights were creating harsh contrast between light and shadow, destroying their operators' night vision while creating perfect concealment for anyone approaching from the dark side. Her first target was obvious: the soldier operating the northernmost floodlight. Take out the lights, and the aliens would be forced to rely on their sensors in an environment where those sensors had already proven unreliable. The shot was routine for someone of Sarah's skill. 400 meters, no wind, target illuminated and stationary. The Caltharian soldier never knew what hit him. The floodlight died with him, plunging that section of the perimeter into darkness. Before the aliens could react, Tommy Rodriguez's rifle spoke from the south. Another light operator down, another section of perimeter compromised. Then Lisa Park from the east, and finally Marcus from his position overlooking the western approaches. In less than 30 seconds, the Caltharian perimeter had been transformed from a fortress of light into a collection of isolated islands in a sea of darkness. Admiral Zektar watched the tactical display as the perimeter lights winked out one by one. "Restore illumination immediately," he ordered. "Deploy emergency lighting." But the emergency lights only made things worse. The Caltharian soldiers, their eyes adjusted to the bright floods, were now blind in the relative darkness. They fired at shadows, at sounds, at movements that might have been wind or might have been death approaching on silent feet. Captain Mordeck's voice crackled over the communications system, tight with stress. "Sir, we need thermal imaging, motion sensors, anything that can give us target acquisition in these conditions." "Deploy all available sensors," Zektar replied. But even as he gave the order, he knew their technology was failing them. The jungle's natural heat signatures, the movement of wind-blown vegetation, the electromagnetic interference from the planet's mineral-rich soil, all combined to create a sensory nightmare that confused even the most sophisticated instruments. Marcus watched the alien confusion through his scope, feeling a cold satisfaction as their disciplined formations began to dissolve. Panic was contagious, especially in the dark when death could come from any direction at any moment. He selected his next target carefully, a soldier who appeared to be trying to restore one of the floodlights. The alien was exposed, focused on his technical task rather than watching for threats. An easy shot, but one that would send the right message. The bullet took the Caltharian center mass, spinning him around before he crumpled to the ground. His repair equipment scattered across the dark jungle floor, sparking and smoking in the humid air. Immediately, a dozen energy weapons opened fire on Marcus's position, painting bright lines through the darkness. But Marcus was already gone, sliding down a rope line to a backup position he'd prepared earlier. The aliens were shooting at ghosts, wasting ammunition and revealing their own positions. Sarah took advantage of their muzzle flashes to acquire her next target. Energy weapons were excellent in many ways, but they had one critical flaw. They announced the shooter's position to anyone watching. Her bullet found its mark, silencing another alien weapon permanently. Tommy and Lisa followed suit, using the aliens' own defensive fire to target their positions. Each muzzle flash was a beacon in the darkness. Each energy burst a signal that said, "Shoot here." The Caltharian defensive line was crumbling, not under overwhelming assault, but under the constant pressure of an enemy that could see them, but couldn't be seen in return. "Sir," Captain Mordek's voice was approaching panic. "We're taking casualties from all directions. Request immediate evacuation." Admiral Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he considered his options. The orbital bombardment would take another hour to coordinate and target. His ground force was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that shouldn't have been able to challenge a single Caltharian soldier, much less an entire expeditionary force. "Negative," he finally replied. "Hold your positions. Reinforcements are en route." It was the wrong decision, made for the wrong reasons, but Marcus couldn't have asked for a better outcome. More targets meant more opportunities to demonstrate why humans had been apex predators long before they'd ever heard of energy weapons or starships. The reinforcement dropships began their descent an hour later, their running lights visible against the star-filled sky. Marcus counted 12 ships, probably carrying another 400 soldiers. The Caltharians were doubling down on their mistake, feeding more troops into a meat grinder that they didn't understand and couldn't control. "All stations be advised," Marcus whispered into his radio. "Reinforcements incoming. Prepare for target-rich environment." The response from his team was immediate and professional. They'd been hunting in the dark for 6 hours now, and their night vision was perfect, their positions invisible, their confidence absolute. "Copy, Ghost Lead. North position has firing solutions on the landing zone. South position ready to engage. East position locked and loaded." The reinforcement troops began disembarking from their ships, energy weapons ready, sensors sweeping the jungle for threats. They were fresh, alert, disciplined soldiers who'd been briefed on what they were facing. But briefings couldn't prepare them for the reality of fighting an enemy that existed only as muzzle flashes in the darkness. Marcus let them get organized, let them establish their own perimeter around the landing zone. Fear and confusion were weapons, but they had to be used correctly. Let the aliens think they were safe, let them believe their numbers and technology would protect them. Then, show them how wrong they were. His first shot took down what appeared to be a squad leader, identified by his equipment and the way other soldiers deferred to him. The alien dropped without a sound, his sophisticated sensors and energy shields useless against a simple chunk of metal traveling at supersonic speed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Energy weapons lit up the jungle like a deadly light show, cutting down trees and setting vegetation on fire. But the humans were already gone, fading back into the darkness like the ghosts the aliens were beginning to believe them to be. Sarah's shot came from an entirely different direction, taking down a communications specialist who'd been trying to coordinate the defensive response. Tommy and Lisa followed up with synchronized shots that dropped 2 more soldiers before the aliens could even process what was happening. In less than a minute, the reinforcement force had taken 5 casualties from an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't effectively engage. Their disciplined formation was already beginning to crack under the pressure of fighting shadows. Admiral Zektar watched his tactical display in growing horror as more red icons appeared across the battle zone. 11 soldiers dead in the first hour of night operations, and his ground commanders were reporting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. "Sir," Villeneuve said quietly, "the humans appear to be using some form of advanced cloaking technology. Perhaps we underestimated their technological capabilities." Zektar's laugh was bitter. "Cloaking technology? They're using projectile weapons and plant matter for concealment. This isn't advanced technology, it's primitive cunning elevated to an art form." And that was exactly the problem. The Caltharian Empire had conquered the galaxy through technological superiority, overwhelming firepower, and disciplined tactics. They'd never faced an enemy that fought like a force of nature, that used the environment as a weapon and darkness as an ally. They were learning, too late, that sometimes the most primitive methods were the most effective. Down in the jungle, Marcus was preparing for the final phase of the night's operations. The aliens were scared, confused, and making increasingly desperate decisions. It was time to show them just how dangerous a scared human could be. He selected his next target, the command post that the reinforcements had established near the landing zone. Taking out their command structure would leave the surviving soldiers leaderless and isolated, easy prey for what he had planned next. The shot was challenging, 800 meters through shifting shadows and heat shimmer from the burning vegetation. But Marcus had been making difficult shots since he was 12 years old, learning from a grandfather who'd been making them since before his father was born. The Caltharian commander never saw death approaching. One moment he was studying tactical displays and coordinating his force's response. The next, he was lying on the jungle floor while his subordinates scrambled for cover and screamed orders that no one could hear over the sound of energy weapons firing wildly into the darkness. Marcus smiled grimly as he prepared to move to his final position. The aliens had brought superior technology to a fight that would be decided by superior cunning. They were about to learn which one mattered more in the darkness between stars. Dawn broke across the jungle with the slow, relentless advance of a predator that had been stalking its prey all night. The pale light revealed the true extent of the carnage. 17 Caltharian soldiers lay dead around the perimeter, their sophisticated equipment scattered across the forest floor like technological grave markers. Purple blood had soaked into the rich earth, feeding the same plants they had mocked as primitive camouflage just 24 hours earlier. Admiral Zektar stood in his command ship's observation deck, watching the sunrise paint his defeat in shades of green and gold. His ground force, once a disciplined military unit, had devolved into a collection of frightened soldiers who jumped at every shadow and fired at every sound. "Sir," Captain Mordeck reported, his voice hollow with exhaustion and failure, "we've lost contact with 3 more patrols. The humans are picking us off one by one." Zektar's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this information. 3 more patrols, 12 more soldiers, vanished into the jungle without a trace. No distress calls, no energy weapon fire, no indication of combat. They'd simply ceased to exist, as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. "Ow!" he whispered, more to himself than to his subordinate. "How are primitive colonists destroying elite Imperial troops?" Down in the jungle, Marcus Chun could have answered that question easily. The humans weren't destroying the Caltharians through superior firepower or advanced technology. They were doing it through the application of 50,000 years of predatory evolution, refined by generations of warriors who understood that the deadliest enemy was the one you never saw coming. Marcus crouched in his hide, studying the latest Caltharian patrol through his scope. 6 soldiers moving in perfect formation, sensors sweeping continuously, weapons ready for immediate engagement. They were good soldiers following sound tactical doctrine. Under normal circumstances, they would have been nearly invincible. But these weren't normal circumstances. The jungle had become humanity's ally, and the humans had learned to speak its language of shadow and silence. The patrol leader stopped directly below Marcus's position, consulting a handheld device that was probably trying to make sense of the conflicting signals the jungle produced. Heat signatures from decomposing vegetation, electromagnetic interference from mineral deposits, chemical traces from 1,000 different species of plant and animal life. The sensors that gave Caltharians such advantages in sterile environments were worse than useless here. Marcus waited, patient as death itself. His grandfather had taught him that the best hunters never hurried, never forced a shot that wasn't perfect. Wait for the moment when your target is completely exposed, completely vulnerable, completely unaware. That moment came when the patrol leader gestured for his soldiers to spread out and search a suspicious-looking thicket. The alien turned his back to Marcus's position, focusing his attention on the false target while the real danger watched him through crosshairs. The bullet took the Caltharian squad leader in the back of the head, dropping him instantly. Before his body hit the ground, Marcus was already moving, sliding down a pre-positioned rope to ground level while his team engaged the remaining targets. Sarah's shot came from the north, taking down the patrol's communications specialist before he could call for backup. Tommy and Lisa followed with synchronized fire from the south and east, their bullets finding their marks with mechanical precision. In less than 10 seconds, an entire Caltharian patrol had been eliminated without getting off a single return shot. The jungle fell silent except for the drip of alien blood and the distant sound of energy weapons firing wildly in other sectors as confused soldiers battled shadows. "Ghost lead to all stations," Marcus whispered into his radio. "Patrol Alpha 7 neutralized. Move to secondary positions and prepare for pursuit teams." The responses came back immediately from positions scattered across several square kilometers of jungle. "Copy, Ghost lead. North team displacing. South team moving to overwatch position. East team ready for next engagement." Marcus smiled grimly as he ghosted through the underbrush toward his next position. The Caltharians would send search teams to investigate their missing patrol, which meant more targets, more opportunities to demonstrate why humans have become a galaxy's most dangerous species. Admiral Zektar watched the tactical display as another patrol icon turned red, then disappeared entirely from his screens. 29 soldiers lost in less than 2 days, and he was no closer to understanding how the humans were accomplishing this impossible feat, sir, Villeneuve said carefully. "Perhaps it's time to consider that we're facing something beyond conventional military resistance. The humans may have capabilities we don't understand." "What capabilities?" Sektar snuppet. "They're using kinetic weapons and plant matter for concealment. Our sensors detect no advanced technology, no energy signatures consistent with sophisticated equipment. They're primitives with hunting rifles." But even as he said it, Zektar knew his assessment was incomplete. Primitives with hunting rifles didn't systematically destroy Imperial military units without taking casualties. Primitives with hunting rifles didn't vanish from the most advanced sensor systems in the galaxy as if they'd never existed. The humans were doing something that shouldn't have been possible, and they were doing it with such consistent success that his ground force was approaching complete collapse. "Deploy the heavy assault units," he finally decided. "If the humans want to hide in their jungle, we'll bring enough firepower to level every tree on this continent." It was exactly the wrong decision, but Marcus had been counting on Caltharian arrogance to lead them down that path. Heavy assault units meant larger targets, more sophisticated equipment, and soldiers who were trained for open warfare rather than jungle fighting. The heavy dropships arrived an hour later, disgorging squads of Caltharians in powered armor equipped with energy cannons capable of cutting through starship hulls. They moved with the confident swagger of elite troops who'd never met an enemy they couldn't destroy through overwhelming firepower. Marcus watched them deploy through his scope, studying their equipment and tactics. The powered armor was impressive, probably capable of shrugging off small arms fire indefinitely. The energy cannons could level buildings and crater hillsides. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the end of human resistance. But Marcus Chun had never been particularly interested in normal circumstances. He keyed his radio, switching to a frequency that reached beyond his sniper team to the broader network of colonists who'd been preparing for this moment. "All stations, this is Ghost Lead. Heavy assault units have deployed. Initiate Protocol 7. The response came back from dozens of positions scattered across the jungle. Men and women who'd spent 3 weeks learning to fight like their ancestors. "Copy, Ghost Lead. Protocol 7 is in effect." Protocol 7 was Marcus's grandfather's final lesson, the one he'd learned in the mountains of Afghanistan, fighting an enemy with superior technology and overwhelming firepower. When you couldn't match your opponent's weapons, you changed the rules of engagement entirely. The first indication the Caltharians had that something was wrong came when the jungle floor collapsed beneath the lead assault unit. The camouflage pit was 8 feet deep with sharpened stakes at the bottom, a trap that would have been familiar to any human soldier from the last 5 centuries of warfare. The powered armor that protected the Caltharian from energy weapons was useless against simple wooden spears driven by gravity and body weight. The alien screams echoed through the jungle as he died, the same way enemy soldiers have been dying since humans first learned to dig holes and sharpen sticks. The second trap was triggered when the assault team tried to rescue their fallen comrade. A deadfall, nothing more than a carefully balanced log released by a tripwire, crushed 2 more soldiers before they could react. Their powered armor crumpled like aluminum cans under the impact of several tons of hardwood moving at terminal velocity. The third trap was the most elegant, a snare that caught one of the armored soldiers by the ankle and hoisted him 15 feet into the air, where he hung helpless while Sarah Kim put a bullet through his helmet's vision port from 800 meters away. Admiral Zektar watched in disbelief as his heavy assault units were systematically destroyed by what appeared to be primitive traps. "Impossible," he whispered. "Energy shields should protect against physical attacks." "Sir," Captain Mordek's voice was barely controlled panic. "The shields are designed to deflect energy weapons and charge particles. They're not effective against kinetic attacks below a certain velocity threshold. These traps are using the soldiers' own weight and momentum against them." Zektar felt something cold settle in his stomach as the implications became clear. The humans weren't just using primitive weapons. They were using primitive tactics that predated energy shield technology by millennia. The Caltharian Empire's most advanced defensive systems had been designed to counter the threats they understood, not the threats their ancestors had faced when warfare was conducted with spears and stones. Down in the jungle, Marcus was preparing the final lesson in his grandfather's curriculum. The Caltharians had fallen into every trap, made every mistake that overconfident enemies had been making for 50,000 years. Now it was time to show them why humans had been the most successful predators in Earth's history. He keyed his radio one final time. "All stations, Ghost lead. Initiate final phase. Show them what it means to hunt with the pack." The jungle erupted in coordinated violence as dozens of human colonists opened fire simultaneously from positions scattered across several square kilometers. They weren't professional soldiers, most of them just farmers and engineers and teachers who'd learned to shoot because this was a frontier world where knowing how to use a rifle was as important as knowing how to operate a tractor. But they'd spent 3 weeks learning to move like shadows and shoot like ghosts, and now they brought that knowledge to bear with devastating effect. The surviving Caltharian forces found themselves caught in a crossfire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Muzzle flashes lit up the jungle like deadly fireflies, but the shooters were invisible, hidden behind camouflage that turned them into part of the forest itself. Energy weapons fired wildly into the darkness, cutting down trees and setting vegetation ablaze. But the humans were already gone, fading back into the jungle's embrace while their enemies stumbled blindly through the smoke and chaos. Within an hour, the Caltharian ground force had ceased to exist as an effective fighting unit. The survivors huddled around their landing zone, firing at shadows and jumping at every sound while death watched them from 100 different hiding places. Admiral Zektar stared at the tactical display in stunned silence as the last of his ground units reported their position as pinned down and requesting immediate evacuation. 3 days ago, he'd commanded 800 elite soldiers. Now, he had perhaps 50 combat-effective troops, and they were trapped on the surface of a world that had turned against them. "Sir," Linnaeus said quietly, "perhaps it's time to consider that the humans have taught us something about warfare that we didn't know we needed to learn." Zektar's mandibles clicked slowly as he considered his options. Retreat meant admitting defeat to a primitive species that shouldn't have been capable of challenging a single Caltharian soldier. But staying meant watching the rest of his forces die, one by one, in a jungle that had become their tomb. For the first time in his career, Admiral Zektar was beginning to understand why humans had become the galaxy's most feared species. It wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their refusal to fight fair when their survival was at stake. 3 days had passed since the Caltharian heavy assault units had been destroyed in the jungle, and Admiral Zektar found himself staring at a tactical situation that defied every principle of warfare he'd learned in 3 decades of military service. His forces, once the pride of the Imperial fleet, had been reduced to a handful of terrified soldiers huddled around their landing zone, while an invisible enemy picked them off with methodical precision. The worst part wasn't the losses, devastating as they were. The worst part was the complete psychological collapse of his remaining troops. Elite soldiers who'd conquered a dozen worlds were now refusing to leave their defensive perimeter, jumping at shadows, and firing at anything that moved in the jungle around them. "Sir," Captain Mordeck reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "we've lost contact with the final reconnaissance team. That's the last of our mobile units." Zektar's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement, but he said nothing. What was there to say? In 4 days of combat operations, the humans had systematically destroyed his entire ground force using nothing more sophisticated than kinetic weapons and tactics that predated spaceflight. "Admiral," Velaneas approached carefully, "the human settlement is broadcasting a message on all frequencies. They're requesting a meeting to discuss terms." "Terms?" Sektar loghet bitterly. What terms could primitives possibly offer the Caltharian Empire? But even as he said it, he knew the answer. The humans were offering him the same terms every successful predator offered its prey: survival in exchange for submission. The message was simple and direct, transmitted in perfect Caltharian. "Admiral Zektar, this is Marcus Chun, representing the human colony of New Eden. We invite you to a meeting to discuss the cessation of hostilities. Come alone, unarmed, to the coordinates we're transmitting. If you refuse, we'll continue to eliminate your forces one soldier at a time until none remain." Zektar studied the coordinates, recognizing them as a clearing roughly halfway between his landing zone and the human settlement. It was tactically neutral ground, offering no particular advantage to either side. It was also, he realized, a demonstration of confidence that bordered on arrogance. The humans were so certain of their superiority that they were willing to meet face-to-face with the commander of an Imperial fleet. "Sir," Velaneas said carefully, "it could be a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Zektar replied. "The question is whether it's a trap designed to capture one admiral or eliminate the last of my ground force." He made his decision with the cold calculation of a commander who'd already lost everything that mattered. "Prepare my personal transport. I'll meet with this Marcus Chun and see what these humans think they've accomplished." The flight to the meeting coordinates took only minutes, but it felt like hours as Zektar watched the jungle scroll past beneath his transport. Somewhere in that green hell, his soldiers were dying one by one, picked off by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't fight. The clearing was exactly as advertised, a natural opening in the canopy large enough for his transport to land safely. Zektar disembarked alone and unarmed as requested, though he kept his personal shield generator active. If the humans wanted to kill him, they'd have to work for it. Marcus Chun emerged from the jungle as if he'd materialized from thin air. One moment, the clearing was empty except for Zektar and his transport. The next, a human in camouflage clothing was standing 20 meters away, a kinetic rifle slung across his back. Zektar studied his opponent with professional interest. Average height for a human, unremarkable build, no visible technological enhancements. He looked like exactly what he claimed to be, a colonial farmer who'd learned to fight when circumstances demanded it. But there was something in the human's eyes that made Zektar's skin crawl. It was the look of a predator that had been hunting successfully for so long that it had forgotten what it felt like to be prey. "Admiral," Marcus said politely, inclining his head slightly. "Thank you for coming." "You've impressed me, human," Zektar replied, his voice carrying grudging respect. 4 days ago, I commanded 800 elite soldiers. Today, I have perhaps 30 combat-effective troops. How did primitives with kinetic weapons accomplish this? Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "The same way my species has been winning fights for the last 50,000 years, Admiral. We learned to use our environment as a weapon and our patience as armor. Your soldiers are excellent warriors, but they're warriors trained for a kind of warfare that doesn't exist on worlds like this. Explain, Zektar said simply. Marcus gestured toward the jungle around them. Your empire has conquered 1,000 worlds, but how many of those worlds had complex biospheres? How many had dense vegetation, competing electromagnetic signatures, thermal variants that confuse your sensors? Most species develop their military technology in sterile environments, fighting clean wars where the strongest technology wins. He paused, studying Zektar's expression. Humans developed their military technology in places like this. Jungles where tigers hunted in tall grass. Mountains where wolves pack-hunted in snow. Deserts where every shadow could conceal death. We learned to fight dirty because our environment demanded it. And your camouflage? Zektar asked. Our sensors detected no advanced cloaking technology. Because there isn't any, Marcus replied. What you saw was the perfection of techniques my species developed before we had fire, refined by 50,000 years of practical application. When you've been hiding from predators since before you had tools, you get very good at becoming invisible. Zektar's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this information. Your entire military doctrine is based on prehistoric hunting techniques. Adapted for modern warfare, but yes. We learned to think like prey when we were prey. When we became predators, we learned to hunt like our predators hunted us. Patient, invisible, absolutely ruthless. Marcus's smile became even more disturbing. Your species never had to learn those lessons because your technology made you apex predators from the beginning. You never learned to fight when you were outgunned and outnumbered. The implications hit Zektar like a physical blow. The Caltharian Empire had built its military doctrine around technological superiority and overwhelming firepower. They'd never needed to develop the kind of asymmetric warfare capabilities that humans had been perfecting for millennia. What do you want? Zektar asked finally. Simple, Marcus replied. You leave. You never come back. You spread the word that Earth colonies are under human protection, and that any species that wants to test that protection will learn the same lessons you've learned here. And if I refuse? Marcus's expression didn't change, but somehow he became even more menacing. Then you don't leave. Your surviving soldiers don't leave. Your ships stay in orbit until we figure out how to bring them down, and then their crews don't leave either. Zektar felt a chill run down his spine. The human wasn't making idle threats. He was stating facts with the same casual confidence he might use to discuss the weather. You're declaring war on the Caltharian Empire, Zektar said. No, Marcus Directive. We're declaring that we're not prey. There's a difference. The Caltharian Empire is welcome to leave us alone and find easier targets. But if you insist on treating humans like helpless primitives, you'll discover that we're the galaxy's most successful predators for very good reasons. Zektar looked around the clearing, studying the jungle that had swallowed his army. Somewhere in that green maze, 30 of his soldiers were waiting for orders that might never come. They'd been reduced from conquerors to prey in less than 4 days by an enemy they couldn't understand and couldn't fight. Your terms are acceptable, he said finally. Marcus nodded. Smart choice. You'll find your surviving troops will be allowed to return to their landing zone unharmed. Your ships can depart at your convenience. But, Admiral, his voice carried a note of warning that made Zektar's blood run cold. Make sure the Empire understands what happened here. Make sure they know that humans aren't defenseless colonists to be conquered and enslaved. We're apex predators who've learned to hide in plain sight. The meeting ended as abruptly as it had begun. Marcus melted back into the jungle as if he'd never been there, leaving Zektar alone in the clearing with his thoughts and his failures. 2 hours later, the Caltharian fleet began its departure from Kepler, 442b's orbit. Admiral Zektar stood in his command center, watching the jungle world shrink in the view screen while he composed his report to Imperial Command. How do you explain to a civilization built on technological superiority that you've been defeated by primitives using prehistoric tactics? How do you convey the horror of fighting an enemy that exists only as muzzle flashes in the darkness? Sir, Villeneuve said quietly, what should we tell Imperial Command about our losses? Zektar considered the question for a long moment. The truth would be almost impossible to believe. 4 days of combat had taught him that humans fought like nothing else in the galaxy, using their environment as a weapon and their patience as armor. They turned a jungle into a slaughterhouse, and his elite troops into terrified prey. "Tell them the truth," he said finally. "Tell them that Earth's colonies are defended by apex predators who've learned to hunt in packs. Tell them that humans have been perfecting the art of warfare since before they had fire, and that they've turned that prehistoric cunning into the galaxy's most effective military doctrine." He paused, watching the stars wheel past as his ship jumped to hyperspace. "And tell them that anyone who wants to test human resolve had better be prepared to fight an enemy that doesn't believe in fair fights." Back on Kepler 442b, Marcus Chin stood in the jungle clearing where he'd met the Caltharian admiral, watching the alien ships disappear into hyperspace. Around him, the forest was already beginning to reclaim the scars of battle. In a few months, there would be no sign that 800 elite soldiers had died here, victims of their own arrogance and humanity's oldest skills. He keyed his radio one final time. "All stations, Ghost Lead. The hunt is over. Stand down and return to base." The responses came back from positions scattered across dozens of square kilometers of jungle. Voices that carried the satisfaction of predators who'd protected their territory successfully. "Copy, Ghost Lead. North Team, returning home. South Team, mission accomplished. East Team, heading back." Marcus smiled as he began to walk back to New Eden. The Caltharian Empire had learned an important lesson about humanity, but it wouldn't be the last species to underestimate Earth's children. There would always be another enemy who thought superior technology guaranteed victory, another conqueror who believed that strength meant firepower and numbers. And when they came, humans would be waiting in the shadows with patience, cunning, and the kind of prehistoric savagery that had made them the most successful predators in Earth's history. After all, some lessons could only be learned the hard way. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their refusal to fight fair when their survival was at stake. And in the jungles of 1,000 worlds, human snipers would be waiting to teach that lesson to anyone foolish enough to think Earth's children were easy prey.